Welcome to the Connected Health Podcast. Today we are joined by Sam, the NP. She's a dual board certified nurse practitioner and an entrepreneur who's had over 15 years of experience in medicine. She's here to talk to us all about peptides. They're all the rage right now, and she's going to break down what they are, what they're for, and best practice for people like us. Welcome, Sam.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So I want to start off with the big question. Everybody's hearing the word peptide on the online space. What exactly is it?
That's a very valid question because, peptides are definitely one of the most talked about things online. And as soon as you say it once, your algorithm keeps repeating it over and over again, right? But it's also one of the biggest misunderstood things, right? So a peptide at its most basic level is just a short chain of amino acids, but they act as chemical messengers or signals, rather. Peptides can be anywhere between 20 to 50 amino acids, but your proteins are going to be a lot more complex. But your body already makes natural peptides. These are going to be things like insulin. You do make GLP-1s, you make collagen peptides, and you also make growth hormone signaling peptides as well. They're very essential for communication purposes within the body. They are not all synthetic. Like I said, your body does make them, and they just essentially signal to the body to perform a certain function depending on the peptide. You can have them naturally occurring within the body, which includes things like your insulin, your GLP-1. But then we also have exogenous peptides, and those usually come from a reputable 503A or 503B pharmacy and a provider that is monitoring these.
That's the most ideal case. However,
Right.
not getting
Ideal.
the peptides from there.
Right. That's right. And in theory, that should be exactly where you're getting them from. There is a lot of talk online about gray market peptides or getting them shipped over from other countries, reconstituting yourself. And those come with all sorts of different risks, right? Because they aren't necessarily regulated. You have no idea what to do with the COAs or the certificates of analysis because those can be very easily faked, right? And just because a label says that it's something doesn't actually mean that that's what you're getting unless there is some kind of regulatory oversight.
It's good to know. What happens in someone's body when they take a peptide, and how are they administered?
So usually the most therapeutic peptides that we think about, they bind to a specific receptor to send a signal to your body, right? They signal a pathway that pushes it into a specific direction. They're not adding fuel, but they are just signaling, hey, perform this function. So for example, we can change your appetite. We can change your insulin release, gastric emptying, your intestinal adaptation, and even, like I had mentioned earlier, growth hormone signaling. Ones mimic your gut hormones. A different peptide known as tesamorelin, it stimulates growth hormones. Now, remember that peptides, they very much are receptor selective, but just because they're targeted does not mean that it's only a local effect. You can have systemic effects, right? Depending on where these receptors are all over the body. So your GLP-1s not only have to do with appetite or gastric emptying, but they also have to do with your body weight, and they also can have cardiovascular benefits.
Now, with peptides being everywhere, I've heard different names like TB500, BPC157, I don't even know how many there are, but why are they popping up in popularity right now? Why are they everywhere? Why am I hearing all these names and numbers all the time?
Again, it's very valid, right? So I think it's a multifactorial issue, right? Social media, they are everywhere. But really, I think that we can go back decades. So we've been using peptides with diabetes medications for decades. Semaglutide and tirzepatide, those are not necessarily new technologies. We've been using it to manage people's sugars and just happen to have weight loss with them. But here in the US, we have a huge metabolic crisis, right? So your GLP-1s, we use them for obesity and diabetes, but 2018, I believe, up until 2023, we have rose over 500% in our GLP-1 usage. Okay. And that's just because of availability, awareness, things of that nature. And now we know that peptides are no longer a niche subject. So as of like a couple of years ago, nearly 30% of adults that were diagnosed with diabetes were on a GLP-1. So it's definitely gained in popularity. They are quick as far as like administration. You usually only have to do the GLP-1s once a week unless you're microdosing, which you can do more than once. So it does have a multifactorial approach, right? You use them to lower your blood sugar, to lower weight. You can get them via telemedicine, in person. It's a convenience factor as well, right? So also have, like I said, the social media aspect of it where it is everywhere. As soon as you pick it up on the algorithm once, it's in your feed 1,000,008 times. Then on the back end, companies get that data and they start advertising to you. You've got celebrities, you've got influencers, you've got before and afters. We also have a big longevity movement that's happening right now. And I contribute a lot of that to COVID. At least that's when I specifically started to get into the longevity movement because that's where my background really kind of started in this space. So originally, I was a cardiovascular ICU nurse. I was working the pandemic. I was pregnant. It was scary. We were putting lots of people in body bags throughout the week. I mean, I think at one point it was like 5 to 7 people every single week. And I saw how reactive our healthcare system was. And I was like, there has to be something better than this. Why are we treating disease way down the line versus taking a more proactive approach? And I think COVID really started to change the way that people thought, and their mindset really started to change as well. People wanted to optimize. They don't want to wait until disease happens. They really want to try and prevent it, which is where we really should be, right? So this type of movement, people are interested in healing. They want to know about injury recovery and body recomposition and anti-aging, right? That's a really big buzzword too. All of these are really big talking points. And people are starting to ask, how can they function for longer, for better, and not just survive? And so I think that that's a really big point to make too. Also, you have the political realm, if you will, right? We've heard about the FDA and the news and peptides. As of just last month, we know that RFK Jr. has announced that the FDA has now moved a bulk of the peptides. I think it's 14 of them or so. We're going to have a regulatory meeting come in July that addresses certain peptides like BPC 157, your KPV, your TB 500, your MOTC, things of that nature. And what this does is this meeting really is a review step to show, hey, is there actual promise in these medications? And because they are being moved, that allows them to be moved from category 2 to category 1. And that essentially means that there's enough evidence and enough support for these to be compounded while under FDA evaluation. Where before it was kind of this gray area as to whether or not you wanted to do it. That's why you could go to one provider and get this peptide, but then down the street, you could go to the next provider. They may say, hey, I'm not going to do that. And that all has to do with our license, right? Because at the end of the day, we are licensed by the state, by the government. So we have to be under very strict scrutiny as to what we are allowed to prescribe. If you have these influencers that say, hey, you can buy X, Y, and Z, they don't have a license to lose. So they really have nothing to lose there, right? So I think the political realm is also kind of pushing it. There's been a lot of discussion about different types of pharmacies, your 503A, your 503B, what is a compounding pharmacy? You've got your HIMSS, your HERS that again advertise direct to consumer, which don't get me on my soapbox. I don't think any medication should be able to be directly advertised to the public. I think we are one of the only countries in the world that allows medications to be directly advertised, but that's a whole other soapbox. But in general, as providers, we really are just practicing in such a rapidly evolving landscape. So we are constantly having to keep up with things. And just because you get it one week does not mean that you can get it the next.
Especially with the social media space, I'm seeing a lot of influencers saying, click the link in my bio to get these peptides because I lost 30 pounds. And I'm thinking in my mind, what gives an influencer the right to recommend something that is, injected into someone else's body? Where do they get the power for that? And I'm understanding now that prior to now, it hasn't been as regulated, but the FDA is starting to move into those meetings, like you mentioned. So that's a good thing.
Right. 100%. And one of the very first TikToks that I ever made was right when that shift from category 2 to category 1 was announced. And I think I posted it like that same night or maybe even the next day. And it went what I consider semi-viral. I think it ended up getting like 25, 26,000 views, something really small for someone that has no TikTok following at all, right? Or at least I didn't back then. And the entire comment section was lit up with buy gray peptides here. My gray peptides are great. Here, buy here, buy here, buy here. And I mean, it was hundreds upon hundreds. People arguing back and forth as to whether or not they wanted to take gray peptides. But at the end of the day, you can't guarantee the validity of any of that, right? You don't know the source. Labels can come from anywhere. Like I said, those COAs or those certificates of analysis can come from anywhere. They could easily be faked. And unless there's some kind of regulatory oversight with it, you're just not going to know what you're injecting. Right. And some people are saying, oh, I've done it for months. Nothing bad has happened. Well, guess what, Brent? You could be injecting saline for all we know, depending on the peptide that you're trying to use or what you think that you're using. It could take months for benefits to really even come. So how do you know? Besides maybe some local site injection, redness, things like that, just from the needle itself. So it really does get into this whole debate of, are you going to go gray market or do you really want to try and do the right thing and make sure that what you're getting is pure in what it actually says on the label? So that's very important to know.
Curious about that. Who would be some good candidates to try out some peptides?
So it really depends on what your goals are, right? I always say that peptides are more so of a building block or they are a helper and not a one size fits all magic pill, things like that. So if you have insulin resistance, metabolic dysfunction, if you are overweight or even clinically obese, if you have any kind of muscle or recovery concerns, if you are in menopause or andropause, if you are worried about muscle wasting, things like that, all of those things, peptides can definitely help with. But you also have to be willing to do the work on the backside.
I'm huge on that. One of the things that I coach people on is foundations. You don't need to
Right.
be adding all this extra stuff unless you're doing some healthy things. You're working on your sleep, you're working on starting an exercise routine. You have to do some foundational work, and then everything else is just a tool to help us.
Absolutely. And I'm definitely of that same thought process as well, right? Because you can throw all this stuff at your body all day long. But if you don't have that foundation, if you're not getting good sleep, if you don't have proper nutrition, if you are not exercising, if you're not doing A, B, C, D, and E, it doesn't matter how much peptide you're throwing at your body. It's going to be like, what the heck do I do with this? Because remember, it's just a signal. So if you don't give your body enough of what it needs at the foundation, it's going to be like, okay, I can send the signal, but then the response is going to be very limited because it doesn't have all this other stuff to pull from to complete that signal.
So you're saying peptides could be beneficial if the foundations are in place, right? I really want to drive that point.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. I am big on foundational support first, and then we build upon that, especially if you are doing this not just because it's a fad, which I don't necessarily think peptides are a fad. I think they are definitely here to stay. But I think the context in which they are being used right now is definitely trending more of like a fad. Whereas my approach in the clinic is more of a longevity medicine base. And what you do, if you think about it like a pyramid, if you will, you have your foundation, your sleep, your working out, your nutrition, making sure everything's balanced. Even, taking out microplastics out of your life, just certain things like that that you can use to mitigate like neuroendocrine disruptors, hormone balancing, things like that is going to optimize you at such a foundational level that your peptides aren't just going to get, I'm just going to throw out numbers, like a 10 to 20% boost. Like they are going to be able to work optimally. So you really want that because otherwise you're going to be wasting your money, right? Or they're not going to be working as effectively. And you're going to be mad at me. And guess what, girlfriend? It's not going to be my fault because you didn't put the work in to begin with.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And the way that I've seen peptides show up on my algorithm is it's framed in such a way that peptides are going to solve every problem that you have, and that's just not true. And so I just want people to know, if you're watching this or listening to this, once you start to say the word peptide, your phone will give you all the ads for peptides, and people will talk about it in such a way that it sounds like this magical pill or injection, and that's not what it is at all.
Right, right. Now there is lots of promise with peptides, right? Don't get me wrong. I have seen them do amazing things in the clinic, especially like surgery recovery, for sleep, for sexual health, for weight loss, things like that. But again, let's take a GLP-1 for example. If you're on semaglutide and you lose weight, losing weight does not equate to losing fat. You can also be losing muscle. And that is not what we want at all, right? Because muscle is the organ of longevity. And I want your viewers to really know that. I want them to really hone in on that. Because if you have muscle wasting, that's going to be one of the biggest predictors of you having a shorter expected lifespan. So if you know that muscle is the organ of longevity, you're going to want to preserve that muscle in any way, shape, or form. And you can't do that sitting on a couch eating a bag of chips, right? You're going to have purposeful movement. You're going to have purposeful stretching. You're going to have to elongate those fibers, add weight bearing exercises, things of that nature, because all of those signal to the muscle to continue to build. But if you're in a caloric deficit, and you're not really doing much of anything else besides drinking 1 or 2 bottles of water and one single chicken patty, that's not sustainable for anyone. And that's where we're going to have that rebound weight come back that many people complain about. Oh, I lost all this weight, but then I gained it back. And that's because you didn't sustain lifestyle changes to make sure that you can sustain your body.
Very good points. And I hope that everyone on GLP-1s and peptides in general are also educated on the other foundational steps that they need to take so that everything all flows together, everything makes sense, and results will actually be accelerated as well as more sustainable. We don't get
Right.
these peptides just for a quick fix. It's not supposed to be a quick fix because you didn't get into that mess quickly. You're not going to get out of it quickly. It takes
Right.
time.
Now they are marketed as a quick fix. Don't
Mm,
get me wrong,
yeah.
because everyone is jumping on this whole peptide gold mine train. Get it while it's hot. But just because someone says something on the internet does not necessarily mean that it's true or that they should be talking about said subject.
That's great. And that's why I was searching for a peptide expert such as yourself, because I didn't feel like I knew enough to talk about it. But thank you for educating us.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Who should be cautious about peptides?
So we talked a little bit about someone who should be on it. So let's talk about someone who shouldn't necessarily be. Then truly there's no universal blanket of, hey, don't use this peptide. But there is and are a lot of contraindications or things that we look for as providers that are very molecule specific, right? So if you want to take this peptide, we look for A, B, and C. If you want to take this peptide, we may look for C, D, F, things like that. But big things that you do kind of want to be cautious about or you want to kind of flag in your mind is pregnancy and breastfeeding, right? We just don't have human studies with that. We do have limited human studies in general when peptides, but especially when it comes to pregnancy and breastfeeding, we don't really have that. Though there are some studies that say semaglutide molecules are too large to go through breast milk. So in the future, we may be able to offer these peptides for women who have gained large amounts of weight that still want to be able to lose a little bit of weight, but also remain breastfeeding. Because I know me, I have 2 kids and I gain anywhere between 80 to 100 pounds each pregnancy. It just is what it is. I blow up like little Debbie and the Michelin Man had a love child, girl. It is what it is. Now, would I love to go on those? Absolutely. But I'm still breastfeeding right now. So just because there's a little bit of science there does not mean that it's completely foolproof. But in the future, that may be something that we can offer. So that's really cool. When it comes to GLP-1s, because of the mechanism of action, we do have to be very careful about like medullary thyroid cancers or neuroendocrine neoplasia type 2, pancreatitis history, just because it does slow down that gut motility, right? And we don't want things backing up. If you've got really severe GI issues, we do kind of want to stray away from certain peptides. If you have active malignancy, that's also a really big one that we want to not necessarily dive into, because a lot of these peptides accelerate cellular growth. And in that sense, they don't differentiate between a healthy cell or a non healthy cell. So we don't want to accelerate any malignant growth, right? If you've got uncontrolled hypertension or severe cardiovascular disease, there are certain peptides, especially for like sexual health, that you don't want to use or give just because it can increase your risk for other things. Also, my biggest thing that I preach on is if you have unrealistic expectations, peptides are not for you. Because again, you're going to have to put in the work. So if you want a quick fix, if you want something that's going to be your miracle cure all, if you're someone who gets on the Google and you decide that you have every single element under the sun, peptides may not be for you. So just because something is trending doesn't mean it's appropriate for everyone. With research peptides or gray market peptides are really the bad idea because you just have a lot of uncertainty. You just never know what you're going to get. So we've kind of gone over who should have peptides or who would qualify, people who should be cautious. Also, if you're not going to listen to your provider and you're just going to do whatever the heck you want to, and you're going to find some random protocol online, at least me as a provider, please don't come see me for that because I'm here to help you. And if you're not going to help yourself, then you're probably not the most ideal candidate for peptides either.
Good stuff. People need to hear that. Let's talk about the most common peptides that people are on these days. Besides GLP-1s, I think we've given that enough time, but what are the other ones that are really popular right now?
Right. So we definitely talked about the GLP-1s because those are the big ones. We have other ones that we talk about when we talk about like muscle recovery, things of that, something like CJC, ipamorelin, right? We talk about recovery and sleep, lean muscle mass support. It actually has growth hormone signaling with it. These are not anabolic steroids. I've had patients ask about that. No, these are not nearly the same, but they do support your recovery and body recomposition. And one of the biggest things is that when you get adequate sleep and when you get good deep sleep, that's when your body does the best, right? And so that combination also helps that. Another big peptide that we talk about is tesamorelin, right? And it's another muscle building one that we tend to prescribe in clinic as well, right? It helps with visceral fat. It does have some FDA approved origins. I think that you can use it for like lipedema, certain things like that. But visceral fat in general is very metabolically dangerous. Many times when people hear that, they think, oh, it's just the fat in my midsection. No, it is the physical fat that is on the organs themselves. And when you have lots of visceral fat, your organs are pleading for help. So it's a really big education moment that I want people to know. It's not just your tummy fat, it's all over any organ in the body. And then you have other categories of peptides, which we use for healing, immune, longevity. One of my favorites is going to be BPC 157, right? Gotta love me a Wolverine. So this is where things kind of can get tricky though, because of the way that regulatory oversight is and the way that you use compounding pharmacies. You do have to be careful about the route of administration that you're doing, at least right now. Injecting versus oral. Injections are really good for musculoskeletal injury. Oral is really good for GI, right? So depending on what you're wanting depends on the method or the route of administration that's going to be best suited for you. But we have animal studies, but we have limited human studies. But just because we have limited human studies does not mean that it's not true, because I've seen it in clinic, right? I have seen it with my patients who do phenomenal on some VPC 157, especially post surgeries, things like that, or say they hurt themselves in the gym. It can do wonderful.
How quickly do people typically see results on peptides? Does it vary?
It really does, right? So it depends on the type of peptide that you're using. With your GLP-1s, sure, you're going to have potential appetite suppression. Some people see it in the first day, some people see it in a couple of weeks, but you're not going to have good sustained weight loss until weeks on. Now, when you take your BPC 157 or when you take some of these other peptides, it can take, a month, 2 months, 7 months, 6 months before the body really starts to build things back up. Because, like you mentioned earlier, it didn't take you a day, a week, a month to get in this state. So it's not going to be just a day, a week, a month to get you back to a healthier, more optimal level. And that really varies by person. Just because it takes me 2 months to get to point A does not mean it's going to take you 2 months, right? You might get there in 2 weeks or you might get there in 6 months.
Let's talk about peptide terminology. People are talking about where it's like stacking and different things and little blends. Like, please tell me what that means.
So the stacking is just a fancy way of saying, hey, we're going to add more than one peptide at a time, right? And you should be stacking them strategically if you stack them at all. If you are newer to peptides, things of that nature, I always suggest you do one at a time versus a stack, right? Because heaven forbid you have some sort of reaction, you're not going to know which component you're having a reaction to, right? So let's try some things individually first. If we do well with that, then let's create you a customized stack or things of that nature, right? Because I want you to have the results that you want and I want to set you up for success. I can't do that if we put you on 8 different peptides at once because Bob down the road said it was cool and he's a big old hunky dude, right? Just because someone says it's great does not necessarily mean that it's true. But stacking appropriately and stacking when clinically indicated can be great, right? Because you can do both metabolic and muscle preservation. So I love to pair a GLP-1 with tesamorelin or with some, which again is another growth hormone activator, things of that nature, so that we have both the weight loss and muscle preservation. But again, those stacks aren't going to do anything if you are not having a good foundation and changing those lifestyle changes that need to be done in order to have that. We've got stacks that are good for recovering and healing, stacks that are great for skin, copper peptides, things of that nature. So it really just depends on what your goals are, how susceptible you are to reactions, things of that nature. They just have to be very intentional and not random because remember, more is not always better.
Yes. And I mean, unfortunately, I got down to the algorithm rabbit hole where it's a lot of gym bros talking about peptides. And that is not
It
the route
happens.
you want to go down because they're talking about these stacks of 12 to 15 different peptides and they're arguing with each other in the comments. Yo, bro, what's your stack? It's ridiculous.
It can be, and I'm not discounting anyone. Everyone has Google, everyone can read certain information, but again, your gym bro down the street doesn't have a license to lose. So if he gives you the wrong information, oh, wow. Whereas a licensed provider who works in this space, who works in this industry, is going to keep up with the latest research. They're going to make sure that they have what they need because that's also their livelihood and their license on the line. So you got to have a little skin in the game in order to really make sure that what you are giving your patients is true. Because otherwise, they could be giving you outdated information. And again, they don't have anything to lose.
Very true. You've mentioned gray market peptides and online peptides. What's the difference between that and medical grade peptides?
Right. So your medical grade peptides are really going to come from like a 50C or 503A or a 503B pharmacy. A 503A pharmacy is more for an individualized person, right? So this is what we do when we have to change a formulation just a little bit. Maybe we change a flavor. Maybe we change it from a liquid to a pill, or maybe it's a different strength of the medication that's not available commercially. Now, your 503B pharmacies, that's going to be your bulk pharmacy. So let's say we do injections in the clinic from bulk. That's where we get those from. They're regulated a little bit differently. So you really want to find a provider where that is what they're sourcing from. If you get peptides from a provider and it says for physician use only, and your provider is an NP or a PA, know that that's a big no-no. That is a big red flag. Know that if it says it is for research purposes only or not for human consumption, those are also big no-goes, right? At least from both a legality standpoint, a sterility, and efficacy standpoint, because those you just don't know what you're going to get. And heaven forbid you order some peptides off of TikTok from foreign countries. I'm staying away from that one, girlfriend. I've seen too many of those.
Too, unfortunately.
Unfortunately.
So, if someone came to you wanting to get on some peptides, what would be the process that you take them through to make sure that they're qualified and to make sure they're getting the right ones?
Right. And that's also a really great question, right? So here at my clinic, what we do is we do a thorough H&P, a history and physical. So you'll fill out information about all of your history. What are your big goals? If you've ever had a medication reaction before, and I will go through that, maybe ask you some clarifying questions, things of that nature. If you've ever been on peptides before, if you've, or if your feet have never been wet and you're just kind of curious, right? Because that tells me how aggressive we need to be with not just education, but your treatment plan as well. Some people will tell you that you don't need labs as a provider. I think that labs are going to always be key because I always want a baseline, right? Depending on what peptides you're using, they can have unforeseen circumstances on the heart, on the liver, and things like that, on the kidneys, but you just don't know if you don't have a baseline to compare it to, right? So we're going to do your history and physical. We're going to do that intake and make sure that we have all the information we need. We're going to do your labs. I'm also going to see what is your nutrition like? What is your exercise like? And please be honest with us as providers. If you don't exercise all the time, that's okay. I'm not going to judge you. I'm horrible about it right now too at this phase in my life because I have 2 kids, 3 dogs, and a cat. But what time do I have? But I feel you on that. I'm not here to judge. I'm just here to create realistic expectations for you as a patient as well. So if you tell me you're working out 4 days a week and you're not losing anything, I'm going to be a little bit cautious about the validity or the truth of that. So just be open and honest with us because guess what? We may need to add on a little something different with your plan than someone that I know is in the gym 4, 5, 6 days a week, right? I'm going to be assessing your sleep because sleep is not just good for not being tired, but it's restorative. That's also when your body does so many other metabolic and biological functions that are super important for longevity and for you to not be a Frankie Pants in the morning, right? What is your hydration like? You tell me you're drinking a gallon of water a day and you're barely taking 3 sips. Well, guess what? You're going to be more prone to certain side effects with certain peptides, right? Abdominal cramping, things like that. Those are very important things to assess depending on the peptide that you're trying to go on. So, are you on hormones? I am a big proponent of hormone optimization, right? Hormones are kind of at the forefront of my practice because I think that they are the basis of functional medicine, which is really more so how I practice, right? Because hormones are upstream and they affect so many other metabolic and physiologic processes downstream. It's not just, oh, I have low estrogen, I'm going through perimenopause, it makes me a raging you know what. No, we have estrogen and progesterone receptors all throughout our body. It's why our joints ache. It's why we get brain fog. And if we can replace these things early, then we can help prevent other diseases or help mitigate the time that we are spent in those disease processes, right? So, what is your hormone status like? And again, I'm going to give you a whole bunch of education. You're probably going to be sick of it, but I'd rather give you way too much information than you going onto Google and trying to figure out something and trying to sift through all of this information, right? Because you can type in peptides online and you go, whoa, what am I supposed to be looking at? Which website do I go to? Which one is reputable? Which one's not reputable? And just because you see it on a Reddit post, who knows whether or not it's good information, right? So I'm going to give you lots of education, lots of information along that, and I'm going to support you every step of the way. We're going to do monthly, if not weekly check ins, kind of depending on what your optimization plan is going to look like, because I'm going to be your biggest supporter. I'm going to be your biggest cheerleader. So as long as you are helping yourself, I'm going to be that accountability partner with you too, girlfriend.
I love the way that you walk with your patients and make sure that they're taken care of every step of the way. And unfortunately, I don't think that's what they get in most primary care doctors' offices. Some of the things that I've heard from my clients are like, I only got 5 minutes with my provider on my last visit, and we didn't even get to talk about everything that I wanted to talk about. So
Right.
you seem to do things differently. If someone wanted to work with you, what would be the best way to get a hold of you? Are you licensed in other states? Do you work virtually? Tell me about your practice.
Yeah. So originally I was licensed in Georgia. I will be doing telemedicine in Georgia, but I am about to open up a brick and mortar location here in South Carolina. Yes, it's very exciting. It will be here in Bluffton, which is right between Savannah and Hilton Head. So come to the beach, come and join us. The
Yes.
practice is called Costa Vida HRT and Longevity, where I optimize hormones. We talk about metabolic health. We do peptides. We do longevity medicine, sexual health, because all of those together really are going to give you the best quality of life, right? I'm not saying don't see your cardiologist. I'm not saying don't see your neurologist. They have specialized in those things, and we work in a partnership. But really, those are going to be the things that I am passionate about and what I can really help you optimize so that you can get to a better version of yourself. So right now I am working on the clinic website, but if you want to join my newsletter where I give really great education, it will give you clinic updates. Um, if I have enough people say, hey, I'm in Tennessee and I'd love to see you, I have no problem trying to get a license in X, Y, and Z state, right? As long as the demand is there. So you can just go to samthemp.com. You can sign up for that. And I really look forward to hearing from other people soon.
That's awesome. You want people to follow you on those as well?
Absolutely. So I'm under Sam the MP. It is pending trademark. So hopefully there will not be any other Sam the MPs floating about. But you can just Google that it's on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I'm on TikTok. I am starting a YouTube channel as well. That way I'm going to kind of have more of a long form education kind of thing going on. But yeah, follow me on all of the good stuff.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today, Sam.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.